At my son's wedding, my 7-year-old grandson whispered a warning that led me to a hidden note under the table, and what I uncovered nearly destroyed our family forever. The morning of my son's wedding arrived wrapped in golden sunlight. Soft beams filtered through the tall windows of the venue, touching the white roses, the crystal centerpieces, and the delicate lace draped across every table. The air smelled of fresh flowers and polished wood. Gentle music floated in the background as guests began to arrive, their laughter light and hopeful. It was beautiful, almost too beautiful. I stood near the entrance for a moment, simply watching. Women adjusted their dresses. Men straightened their ties. Cameras flashed. There was a glow in the room, the kind that only comes when people believe they are witnessing a new beginning. And after everything we had survived, we needed a new beginning. My son looked handsome, standing near the altar in his tailored suit. But more than handsome, he looked peaceful. I had not seen that expression on his face in years. The deep lines of grief that once lived on his forehead seemed softer now. His shoulders were no longer carrying the same invisible weight. For so long, sorrow had followed our family like a shadow. The accident that took his first wife, the hospital nights, the quiet tears when no one was watching. We had all been broken in different ways. But today felt different. As I walked further into the hall, guests greeted me warmly. "Congratulations," they said with kind smiles. I returned each smile politely, though my heart carried more history than anyone in that room could imagine. Could this truly be the day our pain finally loosened its grip? I spotted my grandson across the room, dressed in a small suit that made him look older than his 7 years. He stood close to his father, holding his hand tightly. There was something about children who have known loss. They grow up quietly without asking permission. He caught my eye and gave me a small smile. "Please let this day bring him joy," I prayed silently. The bride entered shortly after for a final rehearsal walk. Her white gown shimmered under the lights, and she looked radiant. Guests whispered in admiration. On the surface, it was everything a wedding should be: elegant, hopeful, full of promise. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Maybe happiness was finally returning to our home. Maybe this woman would help heal the pieces we could not fix alone. Music began to rise as the ceremony prepared to start. My son looked toward the aisle with expectation in his eyes. Not fear, not doubt, but hope. And hope is a fragile thing. Still, in that glowing morning light, I chose to believe in it. Because sometimes, after surviving the darkest storms, we deserve to stand in the sun. Even if only for a moment. As the ceremony began, I moved quietly to the second row, close enough to see my son's face, but even closer to my grandson. I never sit too far from him. Not anymore. The music softened, and guests stood as the bride walked down the aisle. Everyone turned toward her, smiling, whispering about how beautiful she looked. But my eyes were not on the bride. They were on the small boy standing beside his father. My grandson held the ring pillow carefully in his hands. His posture was straight, his expression serious. Other children his age might have been fidgeting, distracted by the crowd or the cameras. But not him. He watched everything. He always watches everything. Losing his mother changed him. Changed all of us. I still remember the hospital hallway, the white walls, the sound of machines that suddenly went silent. I remember holding him in my arms while he asked when his mother would wake up. Some questions have no gentle answers. From that day forward, something inside me shifted. I was not only a grandmother anymore, I became a second shield, a quiet guardian. I learned the names of his medications. I memorized his allergies. I watched the world more carefully on his behalf. And today, on what was supposed to be a joyful day, I felt that old instinct rising again. He wasn't smiling. While others clapped softly during the vows, he stood still. His eyes moved from face to face, scanning the room as if he were searching for something. Or someone. Was it just nerves? Or something more? I leaned closer and gently touched his shoulder. He looked up at me, and for a brief second, I saw something behind his calm expression. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The kind of awareness no 7-year-old should carry. Why does he look like he's waiting for something to happen? The officiant spoke about love, trust, and new beginnings. Words filled the air like soft promises. Guests dabbed their eyes. My son's voice trembled slightly as he said his vows. But my grandson remained quiet. He did not clap when everyone applauded the kiss. He did not cheer when the crowd celebrated. Instead, he stayed close to me once we moved toward the reception hall. His small hand slipping into mine without a word. That simple gesture tightened my chest. Children sense things adults often ignore. They notice tension in a smile. They hear meaning in whispers. And sometimes they understand danger before we do. As we entered the beautifully decorated reception area, laughter echoed again. Music played. Waiters carried trays of sparkling drinks. Yet beneath all the elegance, I felt something subtle shift in the air. A grandmother's heart does not panic without reason. And mine was quietly on alert. The reception was in full swing when it happened. Guests were laughing softly, glasses were being raised in celebration, and music filled the hall with warmth. Waiters moved between the tables, serving food and refreshing drinks. Everything looked perfect on the surface, elegant, joyful, and full of life. I was sitting close to my grandson, making sure he had enough to eat and that he felt safe. He had been quiet all evening, sitting beside me with his small toy car resting on the table. I thought he was simply tired from the long ceremony. Then, suddenly, his tiny fingers tugged at my sleeve. I turned toward him with a gentle smile, expecting him to ask for juice or to show me his toy. But his face was different. His eyes were wide, serious, and focused. There was no playfulness in them. He leaned closer to me and whispered softly, almost trembling, "Grandma, look under the table." For a moment I did not understand. The words seemed too simple to carry any meaning. But the way he said them, quiet, urgent, and full of concern, made my heart skip. Why would a child say something like that during a wedding celebration? I looked at him carefully. His lips were pressed together. His small hands were cold against mine. This was not imagination. This was not a game. Something inside him felt real and heavy. This is not random, I thought, a sudden wave of unease spreading through my chest. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly glanced toward the table in front of us. The white cloth hung neatly to the floor, hiding everything beneath it. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. Yet the way my grandson stared at that space told me there was something he had seen, something I had not. His grip tightened on my hand. He did not speak again. He only looked at me, waiting, trusting. In that moment, I felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on my shoulders. Years ago, when I promised to protect him, I meant every word. Now, that promise felt alive again, stronger than ever. I gently placed my hand over his and gave him a reassuring nod, even though my heart was racing. Whatever he had noticed, I needed to see it with my own eyes. The music continued, unaware of the quiet storm beginning at our table. But inside me, something had already shifted. The celebration no longer felt harmless, felt uncertain, and I knew that whatever was under that table would change everything. I slowly turned my gaze toward the table again, trying to remain calm. My grandson was still holding my hand, watching me closely. The music continued in the background, and guests were smiling, completely unaware of the tension building at our table. I took a quiet breath and then gently bent down beside him. The white tablecloth brushed against my shoulders as I lowered myself to the floor. For a brief moment, the world above felt distant. Voices fading, laughter becoming softer, as if I had entered another space. Carefully, I lifted the edge of the cloth. Under the table, the lighting was dim. Chairs stood neatly in place. Nothing appeared unusual at first glance. But then I noticed something small near the wooden leg of the table. A folded piece of paper. My heart began to beat faster. It was taped underneath the table, hidden from plain sight. My fingers hesitated for a second before reaching toward it. Please let this be nothing, I thought silently, even though my instincts were already telling me otherwise. With trembling hands, I removed the tape and picked up the note. It was folded carefully, as if someone wanted it to remain unnoticed until the right moment. I unfolded it slowly, feeling the paper shake between my fingers. The words were short, clear, and disturbing. The note contained instructions addressed to the catering staff, mentioning our table number and specifically referring to my grandson. It instructed that something should be added to his food. I felt the room spin slightly. Something in my chest tightened so suddenly that I had to steady myself against the table leg. The words were not vague. They were intentional, direct, targeted. Why would anyone write something like this? My eyes moved back to my grandson. He was watching me without blinking, as if he already knew what I would find. His small face was pale but calm, the calmness of a child who had already connected the pieces. A cold wave moved through my body. I looked again at the note, reading it one more time to be sure I was not imagining it. But the message remained the same, a deliberate instruction involving my grandson's food. The celebration above me suddenly felt distant and fragile. The music no longer sounded joyful. It sounded careless. I folded the note tightly in my hand, my heart pounding with urgency. Whatever this was, it was not an accident. Someone had placed this here on purpose. And now I knew I could not ignore it. The moment I read the word on the note, my breath caught in my throat. Shrimp. My hands tightened around the paper as memories rushed back into my mind. The instruction was not random. It mentioned adding shrimp to the food at our table, specifically to my grandson's serving. And shrimp was the one thing that could put his life in danger. A sudden wave of fear washed over me. How could anyone choose that ingredient knowing what it could do? My thoughts immediately traveled back to that terrible night years ago. He had been much younger then, his small body weak with fever and discomfort after accidentally eating something containing seafood. Within minutes, his skin had turned red. His breathing had become shallow. His lips had started to swell. I remember carrying him into the hospital in a panic, my heart racing so fast I thought it would break through my chest. The emergency room lights felt too bright. Doctors and nurses moved quickly around him while I stood frozen, praying silently. That night felt endless. He was connected to machines. I remember holding his tiny hand, whispering encouragement even when I was terrified inside. I remember the doctor explaining that another exposure could be far worse. It was the longest night of my life. And now, standing under the wedding table, those memories returned with full force. The paper in my hand was no longer just a note. It was a threat. Not again, I thought, feeling my chest tighten. My grandson was seated only a few steps away, unaware of how close danger had come. If the kitchen followed those instructions, if even a small amount of shrimp reached his plate, the consequences could be immediate and severe. My mind began calculating rapidly, the menu, the plates already served, the waiters moving between tables. Panic threatened to rise, but I forced myself to stay steady. I could not allow fear to control me. I looked at my grandson again. He was watching me carefully, his expression serious beyond his years. He understood something was wrong, even if he did not fully know what. That realization made my heart ache. He had already survived one life-threatening reaction. He deserved safety, especially today, especially here, surrounded by family. The joyful music in the hall suddenly felt distant. Everything around me blurred as protection became my only focus. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about survival. And I would not allow history to repeat itself. After finding the note and remembering my grandson's allergy, I could no longer sit quietly. My heart was alert, my eyes searching, my instincts fully awake. I slowly returned to my seat, keeping the folded paper safely in my bag. On the surface, nothing had changed. The music played, guests laughed, waiters moved between tables with trays of food. The celebration continued as if it were a normal wedding day. But I was no longer seeing a celebration. I was seeing details. My eyes began to follow the bride. She stood near the center of the hall, smiling brightly as cameras flashed around her. Her white dress shimmered under the lights, and for a moment she looked like the picture of perfection. Guests complimented her beauty, and she responded with graceful nods. Yet something felt different now. Her smile did not reach her eyes. It appeared carefully placed, like a performance repeated many times before. When she laughed, it sounded slightly louder than necessary. When she turned toward my son, she adjusted her posture as if aware of every movement being watched. Why does she seem so aware of the room? I wondered quietly. I noticed her glance toward the catering area near the dessert table. Her expression changed subtly, focused, controlled. She walked in that direction with calm steps, holding her glass of wine. I kept watching. From a distance, I saw her lean closer to one of the catering staff members. She lowered her voice, speaking softly so others would not hear. The staff member nodded quickly while adjusting trays on the dessert table. The conversation lasted only a few seconds, but those seconds felt heavy. The dessert table was where the main dishes would soon be served. My grandson was seated near that area. My attention sharpened immediately. Could this be connected to the note? I remained seated, pretending to engage in conversation with a nearby guest, but my eyes never left the bride. Every movement she made now seemed intentional. She checked the table settings. She adjusted a plate. She spoke briefly again to the same staff member. Her expression remained polite, yet there was a controlled intensity beneath her composure. Inside, my thoughts were racing. Stay calm. Observe carefully. Do not react too soon. I reminded myself that assumptions could be dangerous, but ignoring patterns could be even more dangerous. The room still felt festive to everyone else. No one suspected anything unusual. Yet at our table, my grandson sat quietly, unaware of my silent vigilance. I looked at him once more, then back at the bride. Protection now required attention, and I would not miss a single detail. The dessert service began, and the atmosphere in the hall remained bright and festive. Guests were chatting happily, unaware of the tension that had quietly taken root at our table. I kept my grandson close, my eyes constantly scanning the movement of the staff near the dessert area. Then I saw it. A server walking directly toward table 8. In his hands was a carefully arranged dessert plate, elegant, decorated, and clearly prepared for someone special. My heart tightened as I noticed his direction. He was approaching my grandson's seat. My breathing slowed, but my thoughts moved quickly. The server gently placed the plate in front of my grandson, smiling politely. It looked harmless, beautifully presented, sweet, and festive. My grandson looked up, his eyes curious. His small hand moved slightly toward the spoon. In that instant, time felt suspended. Without hesitation, I reached forward and gently but firmly placed my hand over the plate. The room around us seemed to fade. My grandson looked at me in surprise. The server paused, uncertain. I lifted the plate slightly and examined it closely, searching for anything unusual. My heart pounded loudly in my ears. Please let this be safe, I thought, though I already knew I could not take any chance. I turned the plate slightly, checking the ingredients. The presentation was beautiful, but beauty does not guarantee safety. The music in the background suddenly felt distant. I could sense eyes beginning to turn toward our table. My movement had interrupted the flow of service. The server appeared nervous. I looked directly at him and spoke calmly but firmly, asking who had prepared this dish and whether it followed the menu instructions. Why would anyone bring this specific dessert to my grandson without confirming the ingredients? My voice remained controlled, but my authority was clear. The nearby conversations slowed. Guests began to notice the tension. I felt the atmosphere shifting, curiosity replacing laughter. The server hesitated, glancing toward the catering area, clearly unsure how to respond. I kept the plate in my hands, refusing to release it. My grandson held my sleeve again, silently trusting that I would protect him. That small touch strengthened my resolve. I knew that if there was even the smallest possibility of danger, I had to stop it immediately. Waiting would not be an option. The hall had grown quiet now, attention slowly gathering around our table. And in that silence, I understood something important. Sometimes protection requires courage in front of everyone. I would rather face questions than risk regret. The hall was still tense from the moment I stopped the dessert plate. Guests were whispering quietly, sensing that something unusual was happening at table 8. My grandson stayed close to me, holding my hand tightly. I could feel his small fingers trembling, but he did not cry. He trusted me. I took a slow breath. This was no longer something I could handle silently. With steady hands, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folded note I had found under the table. The paper felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of the truth inside it. I stood up. The music continued for a few seconds, but when I raised my voice, it gradually faded. "I need everyone's attention," I said clearly, though my heart was pounding. The conversation stopped. Heads turned. Glasses paused mid-air. The room became silent. I held the note high enough for nearby guests to see. The folded paper looked small, but its meaning was powerful. I unfolded it slowly in front of everyone, making sure the words were visible. Gasps spread across the hall like a wave. My son looked toward me immediately. His expression changed from confusion to concern. He stepped closer to our table, trying to understand what was happening. The bride stood beside him, her smile now stiff and uncertain. I felt a sharp ache in my chest as I looked at my son standing there, caught between his new bride and his child. "Please understand why I am doing this," I thought silently. I read the note aloud so everyone could hear. The instructions mentioned our table number and referenced adding shrimp to my grandson's food. My voice did not shake, even though my emotions were strong. I wanted the truth to be heard clearly. A murmur filled the hall. Guests looked at one another in disbelief. Some covered their mouths. Others leaned forward, trying to confirm what they had just heard. The bride's expression shifted. For a brief moment, her composure faltered. She quickly tried to deny the connection, speaking calmly, suggesting it was a misunderstanding. But the room had already changed. The atmosphere no longer felt celebratory. My son looked at the note, then at his child, and then at his bride. I could see confusion turning into realization in his eyes. The weight of the situation was settling on him. My grandson remained close to me, his presence reminding everyone why this mattered. The silence in the hall felt heavier than the music had been. And in that silence, the truth began to take control. After the public accusation, the hall remained frozen in heavy silence. Guests waited, watching as the tension unfolded between our family members. My son looked shaken, his eyes moving between me, his child, and his bride. The bride stood still, trying to maintain composure, but the room no longer felt like a celebration. Then someone suggested reviewing the security cameras. The venue manager quickly agreed. Within minutes, a laptop was brought forward, and the footage from the camera above table 8 was displayed for everyone to see. The screen glowed in the dimmed hall, drawing all attention toward it. My heart began to beat faster as the video played. We saw guests arriving, servers moving between tables, and the lively atmosphere of the reception. The camera angle clearly showed the area beneath table 8, the very place where the note had been discovered. Everyone leaned closer. The footage showed a staff member briefly approaching the table earlier in the evening. At first, it seemed ordinary. But then the video revealed something unexpected. A young woman quietly handing an item to the staff member near the dessert station. Their interaction was brief, but clear enough to be seen. The room grew tense. The manager paused the video and zoomed in for clarity. The image confirmed the exchange. The note had not appeared randomly. It had been passed deliberately through someone connected to the catering team. A murmur spread across the hall. Was this really happening? The footage continued. It showed the staff member placing the folded note under the table exactly where my grandson later found it. The timing matched perfectly. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my posture steady. The truth was no longer based on emotion, it was documented. The bride's expression changed as the evidence unfolded. Her earlier confidence faded, replaced by visible panic. She attempted to explain, suggesting miscommunication, but the recording had already spoken. The cameras do not have feelings, only facts, I thought quietly. My son stood motionless. Watching the screen, he seemed to relive each second in silence. His face showed pain, not only from betrayal, but from realizing how close his child had come to danger. The guests were no longer whispering. They were stunned. The footage had shifted everything. Motives were now being questioned, loyalties examined, and trust broken in front of everyone. I looked at my grandson, who was holding my hand tightly. He did not understand every detail, but he understood one thing. He was safe because someone listened to him. The truth had finally stepped into the light, and no one could deny what the cameras had revealed. The wedding hall that was once filled with music and celebration now felt quiet and heavy. The cameras had spoken. The truth was no longer hidden. Guests slowly began to leave, their faces marked with shock and disbelief. The atmosphere that had promised joy was replaced with clarity. Painful but necessary. My son stood in the center of it all. For a long moment he did not move. His eyes were red, his expression deep with emotion. He looked at his bride, then at his child, as if trying to understand how love, trust, and danger had crossed paths on the same day. The decision before him was not easy, but as a father, his responsibility was clear. He walked slowly toward his child and knelt down, bringing himself to the level of the small boy holding my hand. His voice trembled when he spoke. "I am sorry," he said softly. "I should have protected you better." My grandson looked at him with quiet eyes. There was no anger in that gaze, only innocence. The kind of innocence that trusts adults to keep promises. I felt tears gather in my own eyes. My son then turned toward the bride. The room was silent as he spoke calmly, stating that his priority was the safety of his child. He could not ignore what had happened. He could not risk trust again without answers. The bride tried to respond, but the evidence had already changed everything. The security footage remained on the screen, a reminder that truth cannot be undone. The guests watched respectfully, understanding that this was no longer about a celebration. It was about protection. My son made his choice. It was not a choice of anger. It was a choice of responsibility. He requested that the situation be handled properly, ensuring his child's safety first. The wedding ended quietly, without further conflict. There were no cheers, no music, no final dance. Only understanding. As we prepared to leave the hall, I held my grandson close. He seemed calmer now, as if the storm had passed. My son walked beside us, his steps steady but thoughtful. The day had not ended as anyone expected. But sometimes clarity is more important than celebration. Outside the venue, the evening air felt gentle. The sky was calm, as if reflecting the new direction our family had taken. We walked away shaken, yet united in protection and truth. Our family had been tested, and we had chosen safety over appearance. And in that choice, something stronger had quietly formed. Moral: a family becomes stronger when it chooses protection and truth over pride and appearances.